Hey guys, for this video I'm going to demonstrate shading 6 different spheres using 6 different mediums. And the first one that we're going to do here is graphite. So starting out, you want to have your paper set up like this. You want 3 different circles with 3 rectangles above them. You can trace some circular object, whatever is going to fit on the page, and then I just kind of free-handed a skinny rectangle, and that's going to be my value scale. So getting set up here with the materials, I have an HB pencil or a mechanical pencil, just that's kind of your standard writing pencil, and that's the middle value. I'll have a darker pencil like a 4B or a 6B, and then you could also have a lighter pencil like a 4H. So you can see right here I'm dividing these rectangles into 7 separate sections, and that's the value scale that I like to refer to. I like to refer to these values in terms of numbers, 1 through 7, with 1 being the lightest, 7 being the darkest. And then I'll go through making a value scale with each one of these different mediums, and hopefully that will give you an idea of how to work with them, how to get a handle on how to apply the value with them. And so here I grab my dark pencil, my 4B, and I'm going to fill in that darkest section. And so I'm pushing very hard, and I'm filling it in completely so that there's no white paper showing through. And then I'll label it 4B, and then I'll go to the top of the value scale and label that with maybe my lighter pencil like my 4H. In this case I'm going to just use my mechanical pencil and just push very, very lightly. I'm just dragging the pencil across the top of the paper, and I'm letting a lot of that white show through. And if you did have a lighter one, you could write 4H there. And then I'll go to the middle square, the middle section, and I just kind of push with a medium pressure. I need to give myself enough room to go darker on the next darker square, and then also to go a little bit lighter on the next lightest square, because I'll use that HB pencil for the square above and below it. And here you can kind of see I did a hatching and a cross hatching. I'm going vertical here. I went horizontal before. And so I grab my B pencil and I'm just pushing a little more lightly, and then like I said, I'll use the HB for the rest of it. I'm going to go through how to shade a sphere, and I'm going to use the same approach for each of these following spheres. So I'm just going to go through this once, and then you can take this and apply it to the following ones. So I start by kind of outlining those circles, and those are just kind of a map for where my value is going to go. And I'm making sure that my value is following the form and curving around that sphere that I'm trying to make. My values follow in form, and my marks are following form. You see how I'm making these marks that are curving up the side of the sphere, and that's what I mean by that. For example, you wouldn't want to be going horizontal here. You want your marks to go the way of the form that you're trying to create. And I'm starting by planning the shadow. So my light source would be coming from the upper left-hand part. Therefore, the shadow, the darker part, would be in the bottom right. And then it'll get lighter as it moves towards the highlight. And I also leave a highlight in the bottom right hand, and that's where some light will hit the surface that whatever object you might be drawing is sitting on, and it will reflect back up, and you'll have a little bit of a highlight in the bottom part of your object as well, and the darkest part will actually be right above that. So I start light. This is kind of my first pass. I like to talk about the different passes. So my first pass is hatching, cross hatching, planning where my shadows are going to be. And that's where I'm at right now. And then I would kind of work through my second pass where I will use a darker pencil and then really make sure that I'm matching value. Right now I'm not too concerned with matching value. I'm just planning the shadow. And here I grabbed a brush. You could use a paper stump. If it's a larger area, you could just use like a paper towel. But I'm kind of blending that first pass, smoothing out the transition areas a little bit, because I want to have a really smooth transition between the values. That's what it's going to make it look like it's a smooth surface. And now I'm onto the second pass where I'm grabbing that darker drawing pencil, and I'm much more concerned with actually matching the value now. And then my final pass is kind of my details. So I'm going to erase some highlights. I use the kneaded eraser there, and then the pencil eraser in that bottom right hand side. And I do that to make sure I get my highlights to be really white, because I want to try to have a value for each of the squares, each of those sections in my value scale, and work my way through that entire value scale and have smooth transitions between each of those values. You want to kind of blend those together, and that's what will make it look like a nice, smooth, round sphere. I'm adding some value now below it for the cast shadow. So the light source is from the upper left, it hits the object, and then the object will cast a shadow onto the surface that it's sitting on. And just a couple little touch-ups here, a couple areas that I want to pay a little bit more attention to, but you can see it's relatively close to being done. For my next sphere and value scale, I'll be working with markers. They look like this, and there are a variety of different tips, and those letters on the ends of the markers that you see there will tell you what sort of tip you're going to be working with. And it'd probably be a good idea just to get a feel for them, practice them a little bit. So you see this tip right here is really long, and it kind of bends as you turn the corners, and it will give you different weights of lines, different thicknesses. And then some will be shorter. There's really just a variety, and it depends on which pack you grab too. But whichever pack you grab, be a good idea to kind of test out what's going to work for you. Now that I kind of know what these different tips do, I can make my value scale. And you want to be conscious of the fact that you're not going to be able to blend these the way that you blend graphite. So it's probably a better idea to start lighter, because you'll be able to make it darker, but you can't go backwards with these markers. So I start with that darkest square, because obviously that's going to be black. Up in this top, in the lightest square, in the 1 value, I use the smallest marker tip, and I'm pushing lightly, spreading out those marks so that there's lots of paper showing through. And now I'm going to work in between these two extremes to try to fill in the rest of the value scale as gradually as I can. And I'm going to use a variety of markers here, and I'm not really going to tell you what I use, because I think that it doesn't really matter which markers you use, and that you could use whichever ones if you, it's all about where you put your marks, how far apart you space them, how hard you're pushing. So it really just depends, and you can make anything work. So don't worry about it too much, and just work with what you got. You can see that I'm starting this marker sphere pretty much the same way that I started the graphite sphere. I'm kind of planning those layers. Maybe you could visualize like a jawbreaker layers, and it's really important for the marker especially that my marks are following the form, because again, you're not going to be able to blend those. So you're going to see the direction that those marks are going, and if they're going a direction other than around the surface of the form, it's not going to work as an illusion. So you want to make sure that you're really curving those and placing those marks where you need to be. So you got to be a little bit more careful when you're making these marks. And it's pretty much the same concept. I'm just going to make my marks and work through the value scale. I'll do a couple passes, one planning, and then I'll really try to concentrate on hitting all the values on my second pass. Now, if you notice my technique for the highlighted areas, I used really short marks, and I think that that's an effective way to get the highlighted areas when you're working with markers. Okay, so the final medium for the white sheet of paper is going to be India ink, and here I have a dip pen or fountain pen, calligraphy pen, people call it different things, and you can use the ink for that. You can also use it kind of like watercolor. You can put it on a dish and have a cup of water with you, a paper towel, a brush, and use the ink in the way that I'm going to demonstrate right here. And so this is a little bit of a trickier medium in my opinion, and it takes a little bit of practice too. Now maybe if you've worked with watercolor it might come a little bit more natural, but if you haven't, it takes a little bit of getting used to, and you might need to make, you know, one or two value scales. Here I'm just kind of demonstrating how to use that dip pen. You just submerge it in the ink, and it holds the ink in between the two pieces of metal, and as you put pressure those pieces separate, and then the ink kind of drops out of that. And I made a value scale here on the left hand side with that pen, and you could do that too to get a little bit of practice using that pen. And then I'm going to make another value scale using the brush. Alright, now doing this value scale is an important part of trying to figure out how to control this. So the ink is all the way black, it's as dark as it can get. And then the only way to make it lighter is to add a little bit of water to dilute it, and therefore some of the paper will show through, some of that lighter colored paper, and it will appear to be a little bit lighter. And the technique that I chose to go with when I'm doing this value scale was I would lay down the ink, and then I would clean my brush off and use a little bit of water to add to the ink that was already on the paper, and then I could thin it out. I could spread it out and use the ink that was already laid down. Instead of trying to add more ink, I would use what was already on the paper and use water to move it around. And it seemed to work all right for me. I'm sure that there's different ways that you can do it, and you can experiment a little bit at this stage right here. It'd be a good time to do it. Now for shading the sphere, it's pretty much the same approach again. I put down those layers, I start with my shadows. You notice I'm starting all the way black, which I don't really recommend. I recommend planning it usually, and I still would recommend that. I went a little dark on this one, but that's alright. Sometimes you gotta work with what you have, and sometimes you gotta work through some mistakes too. Now you really want to make sure that you leave your highlights, and then you just work through your value scale, same as the other mediums. You'll notice now that I have a gray paper, and that's for a good reason. It's because my next three mediums are going to have white, and so I want to have the ability to make my paper lighter, and therefore I need a paper with a little bit more color to it. And so sometimes you use gray or a tan, or there's a variety of different colored kind of charcoal and pastel papers. And this is the first one I'm doing, is charcoal. And you see, I wrote a little note right there. It says leave. I want to use the gray paper as my middle value. And then I have the darkest square using that pencil. The vine charcoal spreads really easily, so I'll use that to kind of give myself a little bit of charcoal to move around on the paper. And then at the other end I have that white laid down with the white charcoal. And I just fill in those steps and leave most of the paper showing through. And that gives me a really nice value scale there, 1 through 7, just like I've been doing on the last 3. And I'll do that again on this paper too. So now I'm going to drop down to the sphere and apply these values 1 through 7 in the same way that I have been, working through kind of like those different layers. Now for my first pass, I'm going to just kind of plan where the highlights and shadows are going to be. I'm laying a little bit of white down, and you definitely don't want to lay too much white down. That's kind of a finishing touch, but for just the planning stage, it's alright. I'll use the vine charcoal to plan my shadow, and I really like using the vine charcoal for this because of how much it moves around. You can really blend it around, cover a lot of area really quickly, and you can see I'm using the brush here, and it just starts moving, and I get a pretty good idea, pretty good visual of moving through the value scale. And then for my second pass, I'll use that pencil to get the really dark areas that kind of stay, and I'll use the white pencil to get a little bit more effective highlights. Alright, now I'm on to the color pencil, and this one might take the most instruction. I got a lot of different pencils there. I have 3 different values or hues of purple, a black, a white, and a blender. And you probably want at least that many, and you could even have more. I start my value scale pretty similar to the way I've been doing the rest of them. I use the white for that top square, and then I'm going to use the black for the bottom, but I'm not going to go all the way black. I'm going to leave some room. I use the middle purple value that I have and fill in that number 4 square right away, because that's my middle. And then down for 7, I'm going to get a good chunk of black there. Now, whenever we're mixing, and this is really important, when you're trying to mix these color pencils, you have to leave paper showing through. So I don't push very hard. You can see how much gray paper is showing through there. All those little areas where the paper is showing through, that's where my purple is going to be able to leave its mark, and that will help it mix. So you can't push too hard if you want to blend colors with color pencil. So I'm using a combination of multiple pencils as I go through this value scale. I'll be mixing the different colors for each of the different squares. Alright, as I get started shading the sphere, I'm really thinking about it in terms of multiple passes. So for this first pass, I'm just planning my shadows. I have very little pressure. You can see that lots of the gray paper is showing through my marks, and this will allow me to incrementally increase my value and mix my colors slowly. Remember, I'm not trying to mix my colors all at once. I need to have all those little spaces in between my marks of the paper for my color to mix effectively. So I'm just planning the shadows right now, and then slowly building up my color and slowly building up my value. So kind of just watch along here and pay attention to how I'm moving between my different pencils and going over those transitional areas and trying to build up this form incrementally. So you notice I finish with the white pencil, adding the highlights, and now I'm blending. So you can use a blending pencil, and that works all right. But if you're gonna spend some more time with this medium, I really recommend getting one of these blending markers. These things just work fantastic, and they can really smooth out those pencil marks that are left over, the scumbling technique. So a little bit of smooth out, give it a little bit of background. A nice finishing touch is to add a little bit of the purple into the cast shadow, and you can call that good. All right, and on to the last medium, perhaps the most frustrating medium, oil pastels. Now, for me, I just have to let go of any idea of achieving realism. It's much closer to the style of like Impressionism or Post-Impressionism. Your marks are very hard to blend together efficiently, especially when you're working on a small scale like this. It's almost impossible. So I got three colors. I have a white, a black, a red, and my red is right in the middle, my black is in the bottom, and my white is on top. And you notice I'm peeling a little bit of the wrapper away there. And the same concept that was true for the color pencils is true for oil pastels. You have to leave paper showing through in order to blend your colors. If you just fill it in completely, they'll just kind of move around on top of each other and not really blend very well. So you can see how I lift off and gradually decrease my pressure, and that allows me to put some red over the top of the black, and you'll be able to mix it a little bit because of that. And then I just do the same thing for the white. I lay down the darker color first, so I'll lay down a little bit of the red and then do white on top of it. And hopefully you guys understand the process by now, but it's pretty much more of the same. I'm planning my shadows and my highlights, trying to work through the value scale, and just like the color pencils, I got to make sure that I don't use too much pressure and I leave paper showing for the red to mix and leave paper showing for the white to mix too. But I just work through those kind of jawbreaker like layers and gradually increase and blend as I go. And towards the end here, you get a really good example of what I mean by oil pastels not necessarily being a medium for achieving realism, and that it's much closer to achieving like an impressionism or a post-impressionism. You can see those marks are still very evident, and they're kind of unblended in certain areas, which those are themes of those movements that I just talked about. And there you go. So hopefully you have some understanding of how to handle these mediums. And then going forward, hopefully this exercise gives you the ability to draw on this background knowledge and then choose whichever medium you want to work with for any of the projects that we have for the rest of the quarter. So good luck.